Corey Bayshore and Justin Dunwoody here again, continuing on with our investment series. Today's topic of discussion is rebalancing your portfolio, or as we like to call it, because we in the financial field come up with technical terms for things, value averaging. Basically means rebalancing.
Makes us sound smart.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So with this, actually before we kind of go through, kind of some of the examples, I just want to share, kind of a story. It was actually a client of mine. One of my first clients, actually. So, when I was, probably really early on, maybe, 22 or 23, was meeting with a professor, from a college, from a local college, and he was getting ready to retire. So we were looking at his, what he had saved and accumulated for retirement, and was kind of surprised. I mean, he was significantly, weighted in stocks. I mean, this was a gentleman who had was, like I said, was a professor, had taught for, I guess what at that time would have probably been 35 years or more, and his portfolio was 85% in stock and 15% in fixed income or bonds. The bonds being kind of the lower risk investment, which is really kind of surprising for somebody in their mid to late 60s. And I just asked him, how do you come up with that asset allocation? Because at his age, you would think he would be considerably more conservative. And he said, well, I don't know. I just put 50% into stock and 50% of my money into bonds, and I just set it up that way when I started saving for retirement, and never changed it. So I share with that example with you because that speaks to kind of why you might want to consider having rebalancing. Again, somebody in their late 60s, early 70s, the last thing they probably want to be is 85% invested in stocks, and then have a significant economic downturn that might affect their ability to be able to retire.
Back to teaching.
Yeah. Well, he was tenured, so he didn't have to worry about losing his job. So, but this first example that we have of rebalancing, the first visual aid here, just shows, hey, hypothetically somebody had a 60-40 allocation. Again, as I mentioned in my real life example, it was 50-50, and if you did nothing, over time, stocks are gonna outperform bonds. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. And when that happens, just understand that if you aren't rebalancing, your account or your investments, now you're going to be maybe potentially taking on more risk than what you intended to take, which goes back to, kind of what we're speaking to previously. And we had two of our various, podcasts here where we talked about not missing, 10 days or 20 days or what have you. And the average investor performing at less than 3% when the markets had averaged almost 8%. How all those things happen? Well, I could say that one of the contributing factors is because people aren't rebalancing their portfolios, and they intended to have maybe more a moderate level of risk, like a 60-40 allocation, and now they have 80-20, or in my example, 85-15, and the markets get volatile and they panic. And the reason why that potentially happens is because they weren't rebalancing and staying in their comfort zone when it comes to risk and reward.
A person might have a comfort zone that, hey, if the market's down, my portfolio is down 10-15%. At that point, I'm not getting too emotional. I understand markets go up and down. I move on. I don't worry about it. Well, that 85-15 portfolio, if markets collapse, now we're down 30%, 35%, and that person's not comfortable with it.
Yep.
What happens? They make bad decisions.
They do.
When you get in a portfolio that you're not comfortable with, it might be okay when markets are great, but when you're not comfortable with some volatility, that's when you just tend to make bad decisions.
Yeah. I always use the example. I mean, everybody is ultra aggressive when the markets are doing well. Yep. I mean, I can still remember, like it was yesterday in the late '90s. Had an older client, who was retired and widowed, and she was in a balanced portfolio. And because of what was going on at that time with the tech, boom, probably no different than what we've seen over the last 10 years, she wanted to move from the American funds that Justin had previously mentioned, the American funds balanced fund, to the American funds, I believe it was either growth fund or it may have been new economy, new economy, which was all tech. And I refused to oblige the request, and fortunately, it was a
tech bubble burst.
Positive, positive outcome. Exactly. Yeah, positive outcome. So
yeah, a lot of times folks will just ask us, well, I get it, I should rebalance, but when?
Yeah.
Like, when's that time to rebalance? And actually, the last couple of years, perfect example. The rebalancing isn't always just rebalance from stock to bond.
Correct.
It's type of stock owned too. So if you had, you got your 401k portfolio and you got your large cap growth fund and your large cap value fund, over the last 5 years, if you didn't touch those, what happened? Say you were 30% large cap growth, 30% large cap value. Well, last year you probably were 50% large cap growth. So there was probably a 20% swing there. And then what's happening right now? Well, the NASDAQ and the tech companies are getting crushed right now. So if you didn't rebalance back to that 30 growth, 30 value, your portfolio was just out of balance, and you were taking on significantly more risk than you're probably comfortable with. What happens? You see a large decline, you get emotional, you make a bad decision.
Yep.
So the rebalancing is really meant to keep you in a spot where you're comfortable and keep your emotions in line, so you don't make bad decisions.
And that's the value averaging. Again, the technical term rebalancing, that our industry came up with. But again, that's where and Justin was, mentioned, when do you do this? I would suggest, setting it up, to do it annually. I mean, some argue that, doing it more often than that, like on a quarterly basis, is beneficial. I personally, myself, what do? I do it once a year and kind of set it and forget it.
Just kind of move on and know that you're making the proper decision and it's done for you.
Yep. And the second, kind of, visual aid. Now, again, this is just, looking at, bonds and stocks, but, to Justin's point, whether it's, large cap, value and large cap growth, small cap, mid cap, international bonds, you name it. I mean, that the same, kind of example or, premise would apply. In this example, stocks went up, bonds went down. And then when that rebalancing occurs, you're selling stocks high and buying bonds low. Justin's example, you would have if you would have rebalanced at the end of last year, you would have sold off large cap growth and bought more value, and that certainly would have helped you. Especially given what we've seen, thus far this year. And again, doing it on a consistent basis, not just when you think is a good time to do it.
Everybody's heard the adage, you're supposed to buy low and sell high.
Yes.
What's the easiest way to do that? Just rebalance it.
It is.
And it's going to do it for you.
Yep.
So, even with personal clients of Polaris Advisors, over the last year, we've been talking with our investment committee about our client accounts, and we've started to make this progression from large cap growth to large cap value.
Yep.
Because it's been so out of balance, basically, where growth has so much outperformed value that you want to do those rebalances and sell when it's high and buy value when it's cheap.
Take full advantage of the rebalancing, like the auto function. Kind of set it, forget it. I mean, there are some benefits or advantages to automation. This is certainly one of them. It removes the emotion from the equation. It's just going to automatically happen on whatever kind of time period, if you want it quarterly, annually, however, but it's going to, kind of make sure that over time you're taking advantage of that value averaging, and your portfolio is not going to take on excessively more risk than you originally had intended. So, I mean, with that, I think that's, good
maintain that rules-based investing approach, which is, work with somebody like us, work with your advisor, whoever you work with, to create a portfolio based on some kind of metrics, whether it's modern portfolio theory or whatever you and your advisor are working with. Create that portfolio and make sure you have rules. I'm going to rebalance every year. I'm going to stick to this allocation of a certain amount in large cap growth, large cap value, small cap, mid cap, international, and make it a rule that I have to stick to that approach. So I'm going to rebalance and I'm going to stick to that. And
we do that with our models. So I mean, fortunately here, I mean, again, doesn't make a difference to us. We just want better outcomes for all of you in your retirement plan. That's why we have those models. We as a firm, Justin and I, don't make any additional money by you utilizing, those models. Those are a value add, for all of you. And again, to Justin's point, we're applying rules there,
Yep.
And hopefully removing your emotions or
Sure.
your decision making. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, as you saw, the average investor from our previous broadcast, left to their own accord, are going to make poor decisions.
We can see it. I mean, during bad years, we do our plan reviews, and we can see during a bad year, like year over year, the equity exposure last year and the equity exposure this year. We can see people doing this. So
Yes.
we know they're doing it. And it's just emotion that forces them to do it. And we're trying to, help people take that emotion out of it. And sometimes it actually can be difficult too. If you have accounts all over the place to figure out like, oh my gosh, I don't know how, am I balanced? Am I out of balance? And that's kind of our pitch that, this plan does offer the ability to roll old plans in.
Yep.
Have it in one spot, utilize a model, and then that all your retirement savings are being, rebalanced and allocated properly. And all these podcast series that we've done, you're kind of utilizing those rules and tips and pointers that we're sharing.
You feel free to reach out to us,
Our team as well,
or
yep.
if you have monies in a prior employer or employer's plans, they'll assist you with that process. Yeah. So I think with that, that's a wrap here on rebalancing and the benefits of value averaging.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.